It's August 20th, 1989. Jose and Kitty Menendez are shot in their living room by a shotgun. There's blood all over the floor, and there's two people standing, Eric and Lyle Menendez. The murder was a result of years of brutal sexual abuse and trauma, and maybe the desire for a little bit of land and money. But that's a topic for later we'll discuss. The Menendez brothers portrayed pure evil and violence when conducting this cold-blooded act with no regard for human life. Just imagine if you're staring at the bodies of your own family, of your own blood, and your own parents, and all you can do is maybe think about what you did. But even the brothers had no remorse for their actions, no regret, and no shame. It was for sure a rash decision, for sure. By the time, violence can make a human mind corrupt, which can lead to a dreadful outcome. In this podcast, you will learn about how quick thinking doesn't always lead to a great outcome. This is truly one of the most tragic and depressing atrocities that you will learn about. And this podcast will make you reflect on how you also need to be patient, or this might be you. Let's dive into this. I'm Mo.
I'm Darshan.
I'm Atarv.
I'm Ko.
So let's dive straight into this. Who are we, and why did we become so connected? We call ourselves the Fremont Youngins, growing up from the hood and the streets of terror. So we know what it feels like to be inferior to society and live up to high expectations, because where we lived, it was just full horror, and we had to provide for our families. Every day wouldn't be a great day. Some days you wouldn't get food, some days you wouldn't get water, and even some days you had to work so hard. But we never gave up. Even if we didn't get what we always wanted, we had to put up with that and just persevere through all of the hardships that we faced. One of the places that we reflect on the most horrible and the most tragic place that we have is called the dugout, which can relate to basically labor at this point, but even more intense because we experienced multiple acts of violence, which made us become hardened with the ways of crime and terror. True terror is when a person feels belittled and dehumanized, and that's how we felt back in the days. Our group, however, united through friendship and understanding each other's pain and misery, which is why we call ourselves the Youngins, especially the Fremont Youngins, where we originate from. In our podcast, we will talk about the violence and how Kyle and Eric were belittled, put through many hardships, and we will be exploring the topic in much detail and make sure that our audience also understands why this topic is so important and why we need to understand as a community.
We love our audience.
We're going to be analyzing their decision and reflecting on the outcome. So let's waste no time and dig right into this and with a little background information as I pass it on to my buddy, Atarv.
Okay, so let's dig into the background of the Menendez brothers and their families, because I'm sure you guys are wondering who the heck these people even are. Their family consists of Joseph, Eric, Jose, and Mary is the eldest brother and one of the murderers as well. Eric is the youngest brother, and he is the other murderer. Joseph was born in New York, and he attended Princeton Day School and briefly attended Princeton University. Eric was born in New Jersey. He attended Calabasas High School and was ranked nationally as a teen in tennis. He is known to be more emotional, quiet, and anxious. Jose Enrique Menendez. He is the father of the family and was born on May 6, 1994 in Cuba. He came to the U.S. when he was 16 and is an extremely successful businessman. He was very strict and controlling and set high expectations for his sons. Mary Menendez, who's also called Kitty, she is the mother and was born on October 14, 1941 in Illinois.
Wow, that's rocking.
She was a formal school teacher and later was a full-time homemaker. She was known to be social, however, she struggled with emotional stress at home.
Oh, that's hard.
Sorry to cut you off, Atarv.
All good.
But I had a quick question because I was really intrigued. You said that previous in your information that they attended Princeton University.
Yeah.
And I've heard that Princeton was like a demanding school and it has a lot of wealthy and rich people. So do you think that influenced their mindset and made them want to commit murders, or what do you think?
See, that's a very interesting question, actually. See, that's a very interesting question because I think that they did influence how the kids grew up. Because the societal pressures within how the wealthy families were really influenced them to, have a lot of stress because they went to a good university, right? So there's a lot of pressure to do good. When does that cause their parents and them to have a bad relationship because they were not able to perform under stress, and because of that, it led to a bad relationship between them, which I think was a causing factor in the murders of their parents. And yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Continue on.
Yes, okay. So, the Menendez brothers case is about... The Menendez brothers case is about two brothers, Lyle Menendez and Eric Menendez, who killed their parents in 1989. They shot their parents, Jose and Kiri Menendez, in their home in Beverly Hills. The brothers at first claimed they were not involved, but later they admitted they committed the murder due to abuse from their parents for years, or so they claimed at the time. They admitted this to their therapist through some therapy sessions, while they initially did deny the murders, and they did go on a little bit of a shopping spree after the murders, which caused suspicion between people.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting, Atharf.
The case became well known to many and was shown on TV, with people arguing about why the murder happened, whether it was for money or it was out of fear. There were two trials. The first one ended with no decision, which is a mistrial. In the second trial, both of the brothers were sentenced to life in prison. So the judge ruled in favor of the prosecution. Around 30 years later, the brothers had a chance of release, and they had a petition to reopen the case. However, both of those petitions were unsuccessful. In 1989, Beverly Hills was a location that symbolized wealth. So the world's most successful businessmen, entrepreneurs, and athletes lived in the area, and Beverly Hills was also considered a very safe place due to the extreme security measures taken by the billionaires who went there all the time. The Cold War was also coming to an end, which was increasing the liberal principles in the United States, especially due to the controversy regarding the Korean and Afghanistan wars.
So I heard that the Korean and Afghanistan wars were proxy wars, right?
Yeah.
So it was really controversial and people didn't really like it.
Yes. During the Cold War, those wars were very controversial, and it did really affect the social state of United States and how they really were. So yeah, it did play a very big role in that.
Mm-hmm.
So there were mostly social factors because the Menendez brothers lived an extremely wealthy life. Hence, they were expected to adhere to the standards of rich people in Beverly Hills. So, right, like coming back to Mo's question when he asked me, like, do you think the standards affected them? So, like, yeah, it did affect it because they were rich. So they had a certain standard to uphold. Okay, so due to the same exact factors, they cannot open up about their struggle in an attempt to not tarnish their family, right? Because a lot of the times in these rich homes, a family reputation was very important, so they had a certain standard to uphold, not only educationally and socially, but also reputation-wise. And from a political perspective, the new liberal principles instilled in the country after the Cold War would reduce the public's outrage towards the brothers because they would understand their motives. So, in the 1990s, the sexual abuse of men wasn't accepted, hence the victims never received any empathy. Immediately after the murder, the case gained a lot of media attention from new channels like BBC due to its brutality and uniqueness. About 30 years after the murder, Ryan Murphy made a Netflix documentary to revisit the case, and Kim Kardashian, a famous media personality, pleaded for the brothers to be released due to their changed nature while their time in prison.
Oh, I love Kim Kardashian.
I'm sure you do. At the time, the society criticized the brothers for their brutal actions, but in the modern period, people have started to sympathize with the brothers' abuse. The main dilemma regarding the murder was the sentence the brothers received. As in the past, most people argued that their sentence was valid due to the extreme violence of the murder, right? Because the murder scene was very brutal. There's lots of bloodstains all over. It was very brutal the way they killed their parents, and it wasn't just like a quick one-hit murder. out of just vengeance. It was very like hateful, and you could tell they'd been stirring it up for a while. So nowadays, people are starting to argue that their sentence is too long because of the trauma the brothers had to face due to the physical, sexual, mental abuse committed by Jose Mendez, their father.
Now, Muhammad, please enlighten us with more information about this.
Of course, let's dig into what shaped this atrocity and all the events that led up to it. But first, a little background about what really went down. So as I said before in the introduction, people can have many personalities and they can change based on how they're treated, whether it's with equality or with injustice and violence. Kyle and Eric were innocent little boys and they weren't always evil, but eventually they started to grow up and suddenly started to change due to personal internal conflicts with their parents, and the main problem was just abuse and cold-blooded violence. They lived with their parents and they were wealthy and had a good life until the dad became way too demanding and put way too much violence on their sons. They were influenced by insane pressuring, like I said, by their parents, and this was mainly because their father was a tyrant, you could say, and we'll dive into this more into the podcast, but basically his problems, his values, and how he majorly influenced the outcome. Sexual abuse is a big theme in the United States, and honestly, everywhere it's a big problem, and Kyle and his brother were the main victims, and low-key you could say that it wasn't their fault, but we'll get into that a little later.
That sounds interesting.
Let's start out with the motivations for the killers, because obviously you don't just kill people for random, unless you're bored. You gotta have a reason or motive to do what you want to do. First motivation we'll talk about is ambition. Ambition is when people want power, success, or control. And the Menendez brothers wanted power from their money they would inherit from their parents after they died, making them successful and have more control over the world, which is all they really wanted in life. They didn't want to be belittled or be under anyone or controlled by anyone. Second is fear, which includes losing status, having to go through consequences, and a lot of pressure in general. In court, the brothers said their reason for the murder was fear of abuse from their parents. Their dad, Jose, was also strict and put a lot of pressure on his sons, which forced many conflicts, and the brothers eventually had enough and decided that they just couldn't take it anymore. Third is greed, the desire for gain or wealth. The brothers were motivated by inheritance, which is proven by them spending a lot of money right after they killed their parents. They didn't really care about what they did. All they cared about is how much wealth they gained. If I ever hear that I'm going to receive a lot of money, I would obviously want that for my benefit, because in this world, you have to have a stable amount of wealth to live in general. Other motivations that we could talk about is that the brothers did not like their parents due to the amount of abuse they had and how strict they were and how much pressure they put on them. In general, they just wanted peace in their life and wanted to be alone and be successful by their standards and not what society told them. Let's get into a little background of Jose and Kitty Menendez. The parents of the Menendez brothers also influenced them to commit the murder with their long-standing assault and sexual abuse. Jose Menendez was well known for committing sexual violence towards the brothers, and Kitty Menendez was known for turning a blind eye towards the violence. Over time, the assault and ignorance by their parents instilled fear and anger in the brothers, which motivated them to commit the murder. As I have talked about a lot and recently, that there was a lot of manipulation and pressure. So the pressure from society in the 1990s is what motivated the brothers to commit the murder. Because at that time, men were discouraged from reporting their sexual abuse in an attempt to avoid looking weak or feminine, because men were portrayed as strong. Hence, the brothers felt like they had to murder their parents to stop sexual abuse instead of reporting them so that the world doesn't know anything about them or learn about this abuse. They didn't want to seem weak, they wanted to become powerful. Out of all the evidence examined for the case, there were no third-party influences found, which means that the brothers did not confide in anyone else, meaning they did not take advice from anyone else. This was only their mission. But this points back to the social standards of the time, where men weren't allowed to talk about their sexual abuse. Let's get into the turning point and the real climax of this case. So Lyle and Eric Menendez were brought up from a very competitive family with high goals, because inside of the time, your status and wealth reflected based on how hard you worked or how you were labeled. Their father, like I mentioned before, was very competitive and was trying everything to make Eric better in life. For example, he intensified his education by putting him into extra courses make him do more housework, and basically terminated all the fun Eric had. He had no social life. But this came with a negative outcome. He was overbearing and provided too much pressure on his kids, which made them change and realize that they had to fight for their equality. Eric had no confidence in himself and felt that everything he did was not good enough to impress or make his parents proud. Then we have the inevitable part, which was predicted, to be honest, because here's the thing. When they moved to America, Eric became associated with drugs and violence and started a teen rebellion by robbing many stores. He fully changed into a different person and became associated with the hood. This influenced his other brother as well, as they developed a plan to execute their parents once and for all. Because after Eric became associated with all the violence, his brother also got influenced, and they both decided that they need to work together in order to fight for their rights and equality. Now, why is it a turning point, you may ask? It's a turning point because in this case, it demonstrates how conflict and horror started from the beginning with an abusive father. This created resentment and the ambition for power and money, which created even more conflicts between the family. They also claimed the abuse was too much, and that they were assaulted as well, which created even more tension in the family. The brothers thought that they could never be good enough in their father's shoes and decided it was best to move on and try to pursue a different goal. And that goal was just pure violence, as they ended their relationship and annihilated their misery by ending their own beloved parents. The worst nightmare for a child is to not feel loved or to be a failure in their parents' eyes. All teens ever want is to make their loved ones proud, and the brothers did not. At first, the brothers did not show any remorse for their actions. However, in the future, they admitted to be guilty. An article published by NBC News states that the brothers admitted they lied to the police after the killings, and that after the killings, they denied all responsibility. Eric Menendez also stated during a trial that he's sorry for these lies and there's no excuse for his behavior. Even though the brothers used the shotgun and did not struggle, they at least felt some remorse in the end because they realized that all their actions that they were doing were not technically right, but in their head, they thought it was right at that time. This shows their violent intent and how they had no remorse for their actions, and in general, the brothers went on a road of violence.
Wow, Mo, that was a really interesting topic. But I have a real quick question.
Yeah, ask me the question.
So, how is the internal conflict and turning point moment related?
It's a great question, actually. So turning point conflict actually influences the internal conflict because the turning point is when the brothers received too much violence and abuse from their parents and they got associated in a lot of drugs and robbing stores, and that's what made them want to become more powerful, and that influenced the internal conflict, which is when they use shotguns and other types of weapons to execute the murder, and they got this from all the violence that they were enduring before. That's all for me for today. Now let's move on to what Darshan has to say about this case.
Alright, so now let's look at the consequences of their actions. After all, if you commit such a brutal murder, the police are obviously going to have something to do with you. Heck, even I've been in and out of the bin before, and honestly, it changes you. Man, streets killed me. On a serious note, the brothers were arrested and are still in custody to this day. Throughout the long period, there have been a series of trials and cases regarding the sentence of the brothers, and this case has taken many dynamic turns. Pretty radical, right? The consequences of the crimes committed by the brothers influence their family, friends, and psychology along with modern society and laws. Let's dive into this a bit more. The brothers were arrested on March 8th, 1990. That's kind of crazy considering that the murder occurred on August 20, 1989, which means that there was a 6-month gap. On July 20th, 1993, the opening statements for the first trial happened and it dragged on for 2 years. Then guess what happened in the end?
What? Tell me more.
A mistrial. Really? That is kind of crazy. Yes, that really happened. After 2 years, one Beverly Hills murder case ended in a mistrial due to a lack of evidence. That's outrageous. Then, a second trial started in 1995, and this time, the trial was given one jury for both the defendants. Previously, in the first trial, there were two separate juries for both brothers. In the second trial, they were declared guilty. I honestly don't get how to tell. I honestly don't get how this difference in jury size led to such a major difference in the verdict. Maybe it was because of different factors like different lawyers or a less biased judge. Either way, they were sentenced to life. Almost 30 years later, in 2024, more evidence that wasn't publicly disclosed in 2024 came back, which explained why the judge supported the prosecutors. So, after all this time, the family of the brothers filed a petition in May 2023 for parole when initially they were punished with life sentences and no chances of parole. On October 3rd, 2023, their filed petition was reviewed by the LACTA. On October 24th, 2023, Gascon, who was the district attorney, announced that he will ask for a resentencing.
Oh, did they get it or no?
Wait, I'm getting to it. On February 21st, 2025, Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hodgman filed a response to the Menendez brothers' habeas petition, urging a judge to deny it. This guy must be fun at parties. Alright, drumroll. In May 2025, the brothers were resentenced to 50 years to life with the possibility of parole. Yes, let's go. But honestly, 50 years is still a lot of time for two men who have been in prison for the last 30 years. And as expected, it all went downhill from there. Due to that resentencing, they are now eligible for parole hearings under youth offender parole laws. In August 2025, the brothers' first bids for parole were denied. In September 2025, a judge rejected the brothers' habeas petition for a new trial. Now let's talk about the non-legal stuff, like psychological and reputational stuff. So in prison, one brother was an absolute angel, while the other was the complete opposite. Lyle Menendez was called a model prisoner because he showed moral improvement and got a job to potentially get early release. At times, he was known to show some bad behavior when he had a cell phone, but if I was in prison for 30 years, I wouldn't leave that place without causing some commotion. Now, how does this affect current society? This affects laws a lot because the Menendez brothers' trial was different from a normal trial because it had different standards. Pretty hip, huh? A famous article published by EBSCO states that the trial itself was unique. So you're probably wondering, isn't it unfair for the brothers to be tried differently than usual? And the answer to that is yes. It's very unethical, but according to the Constitution written by my friend James Madison, apparently, to save money for the state, the brothers were tried together,
James
but
Madison
each...
really
Oh
your
my
friend?
God. You don't believe me? He actually was. Apparently, to save money for the state, the brothers were tried together, but each had his own jury. Each time a testimony or evidence was presented regarding one brother only, the jury of the brother not under discussion had to leave the courtroom. Imagine it's 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning and all you want to do is sleep in and get a break from work. But the week before your great slumber, you check your mail and you see the big white envelope that says you are nominated for jury duty. So you're already frustrated while you're driving to the courthouse instead of sleeping in. Once you finally get to the courthouse and the trial begins, you expect this to be like an intriguing documentary about a case, but all of a sudden, the judge says that you have to step out of the room. Standard procedure, you think, until it's the 15th time you're asked to step out and you've been standing next to the bathroom door more instead of being in the actual trial chamber. Pretty frustrating, right? So, even though this trial was slightly unfair and stressed jurors and court workers, it also affected society because the murder trials were highly publicized and very frequent in the media. So the whole world knew about it, and the brothers were obviously judged and hated for it. For some aspects of the crime, the hate against the brothers isn't too far-fetched because, they still killed their parents. The media turned this serious situation into an entertainment show, and to be honest, we're kind of doing that too. The thing that the media did differently from us was including arguments with dishonesty and false information. They also discussed possible movies and films to get money and expand their network. Kinda crazy, right? There was even a Netflix documentary about the case, which would never be as good as our podcast.
Well, I
Juries-
beg to differ. I think our podcast is pretty good.
Yeah. Juries were also admitted after the case, which means that they got in trouble for disclosing their opinions on the case, about the guilt and innocence of the brothers. And the attorneys also made dramatic scenes outside the courtroom to intensify the situation.
Wait, so everyone thought they were innocent?
Yeah. Honestly, not everyone, but the majority of the population. And the case was so out of the wild that people just didn't know how to react.
It's kind of crazy. Even like majority have
Yeah,
Kim Kardashian talked about it.
Yeah, like as we talked about it in the start. That's kind of crazy. The chaos continued throughout the trial, which ended with hung juries and a declared mistrial. The case was so out of line and bizarre that it was already declared really challenging for the juries to make a decision. Now, if you combine that with the large media presence, with many journalists and news anchors hovering around and being present in the courtroom, they also broadcasted their questions. And all that chaos combined, that doesn't sound like a really fun day in court. Due to this, courts had to ban cameras for future trials and limit the media in order to lower the drama and chaos that comes with the trial. Honestly, it's really crazy how cases can directly affect laws and regulations like this. I think that a direct change in laws is a result of the buildup of multiple cases like this. For example, I believe that the change in media regulations in courts was a result of court cases where a lot of chaos occurred due to the media, and the Menendez brothers case was the catalyst for reform. Kind of crazy, right? This means that the chaos during the Menendez brothers case was so extreme that it finally motivated legislators to change the court regulations regarding cameras. I feel like the same thing applies to life. A major change is always a result of multiple motivating instances, and the final extreme event is what causes the immediate change. This was how life was like in the dugout. I'm so happy to hear that they're getting some development down there. There are finally some schools and shelters being built out there for the laborers. Now, let's get back to the brothers. And in the next part of the podcast, we will talk about someone who is just like the Menendez brothers. Someone who knows how it feels to be ostracized because of their actions and brutal quest for power. Someone despicable. Now, let's dive into how this case connects to Macbeth and how the Menendez brothers are similar to him.
To further analyze this case, let's compare the Menendez brothers to Macbeth, a famous play by William Shakespeare. There are shocking similarities between the play and this case. We will inspect their feelings, events in both the case as well as the play, and we will also go over character developments and what led to the tragic events in both cases. For example, you will see connections relating to the characters and the brothers' fear, reasoning, and guilt. Before we dive in, we will give you a quick overview of Macbeth and as well as William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was a very famous writer and playwright and he was also born 1564, and he died 1616. You might be wondering why, out of all the playwrights, why Shakespeare is so popular and why he grew in popularity and not any other playwright. This was due to him choosing to mix tragedy, love, and comedy in his plays. He didn't just focus on one, but he decided to mix all of them. In the past, nobody thought to mix genres and have always stuck to one thing. Tragedy does not involve comedy, and comedy does not involve love. Shakespeare flipped the script and chose to mix genres. This was groundbreaking, and people found his plays intriguing. Macbeth is a popular play about a nobleman murdering the king for power based on a prophecy that he got from witches. He then feels guilty for all the murders he's committed, and his paranoia takes over. When his paranoia takes over, as he begins to kill more people to keep his power, whether it be his friends or an entire family,
Wow,
he
that's
starts.
so interesting.
Alright, let's begin comparing these two shockingly similar cases. To begin, both the brothers and Macbeth committed the murders due to reasons like fear and greed. Macbeth kills Banquo, who is his best friend, because he is terrified that Banquo's kids will be in his way to become king due to the prophecies from the witch. He was also terrified that his secrets would come out because Banquo had suspected Macbeth of killing and murdering people just for his own success. And just to make sure he gets to keep his power, Macbeth decided to kill his own best friend. The brothers claimed they killed their parents out of fear of sexual abuse. However, there's also greed involved. As for the brothers, they wanted money, and as for Macbeth, he wanted the crown. Proof for the brothers' greed is shown through them spending a fortune on Rolexes and cars right after the funeral. They didn't wait even a couple months before they spent all the money, which showed how they only killed their parents, and one of the reasons they killed their parents was for greed. For example, in Macbeth, there is a quote that says, "To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus," which is in Act 3, Scene 1, line 48. Macbeth says this because he is king, but he isn't safe because he is paranoid. This connects to the brothers because they had an inheritance, but they weren't safe from legal consequences. Alright, here is where things get interesting. In the play, Lady Macbeth is the one that pushes Macbeth to kill. She is the instigator. Who was Lady Macbeth for the brothers? In this case, there was no influence on the brothers. This was all done on their own. Nobody told them what to do or when to do it. The decision came from within them. This shows how the decision came from wanting safety and wealth and nothing else. No other external force. Even if there was no Lady Macbeth for them, they definitely had the witches aspect. In the play, the three witches represent fate, and for example, In Act 1, Scene 3, line 49, a witch says, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor." The quote shows the witches saying Macbeth's prophecy, which later turns true, and it demonstrates that this was Macbeth's fate. For the Menendez brothers, the witches was the pressure from society in terms of male sexual abuse. In other words, the prophecy was actually the pressure of silence. In Macbeth, the prophet motivates him to kill. In this case, the brothers felt trapped by society who might not believe them or pity them. Therefore, they felt as though they had to kill to be able to stop the abuse. In Act 3, Scene 4, lines 136 to 138, there is a quote that states, "I am blood stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go." Just like Macbeth felt he had gone too far to go back to being a good person, the brothers had also reached a point where violence had seemed like it was the only way to get out of their troubles and their abuse. Now the serious question is, was this all unavoidable? In the play, the witches tell Macbeth that he would be king, but they never tell him that he has to murder for it. That was all his choice and wasn't fate in terms of how he got there. Macbeth chose that route rather than Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth may have told him what he should do and tried pressuring him into it, but when things got out of control, Macbeth made his own choices and his own decisions. Similarly, the brothers chose to buy those shotguns. They chose to wait for their parents to be vulnerable, and the spending spree afterward, this was definitely their own choice and not fate at all. In Macbeth, he also feels guilt for all the things that he did to other people, and he also went as far as killing an entire family to ensure nobody was in his way. For example, there's a quote from the play that says, stabbing him, "Young fry of treachery, he has killed me mother, run away, I pray you." In Act 6, Scene 2, lines 86 to 88. This scene shows Macduff's wife and son crying out in terror as they are being stabbed by murderers sent by Macbeth. Macbeth killed many people even if it wasn't necessary to ensure his own happiness and success. This proves that even if trauma was fate, and that this is the type of parents they have, they committed the crime as a choice of their own. Both Macbeth and the Menendez brothers chose what path they wanted to take and felt guilty, although it was after the crime was committed.
For that wonderful analysis of many quotes, but I actually had one more quote that was really similar to the play. So both Lyle Menendez and Eric Menendez killed close people around them due to fear and as well as personal gain. This relates to Macbeth because he also kills the king and attempts to justify it, and his mindset is to gain power. For example, in the book it says, "I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition." In Act 1, Scene 7, lines 25 to 27. Macbeth admits that his main motive is ambition, which is similar to the Menendez brothers' case, who acted also out of greed. Both display acts of cruelty and ruthless ways of thinking and executing plans. These cases also involved a two-man duet, as Macbeth worked with his wife and the brothers cooperated together. Another example is after Duncan's murder, Macbeth starts to reflect on his actions, as he states, "What hands are here, how they pluck out mine eyes, will all great Neptune's oceans wash his blood." In Act 2, Scene 2, line 59 to 60. This reflects deep guilt and psychological impact on both cases, because similar to the Menendez case, they also felt guilt and emotional distress. Lastly, both cases include the act of dishonesty and not owning up to mistakes. Macbeth tries to hide his actions by blaming it on the guards to get all the attention off of him, and in the brothers' case, they also initially lied and tried to make it seem like somebody else was committing the murder, showing the attempt to cover it up. In conclusion, Macbeth is the best character that relates to the case of the Menendez brothers because both have similar traits and personality, and as well went through similar process of guilt, covering mistakes, and become powerful. The moral of all of this is how easily human nature can change when trauma is involved and how violence can become a part of it in the process. When people feel overwhelmed or powerless, the side of Macbeth can take over. However, it is important to realize that there is always a way around it, and violence is not the solution. And even today, situations like these are common. The theme of greed and fear taking over and leading to violence is seen a lot. Alright, anyway, that's all for today. Thank you so much for listening to the deep dive on the connections of Macbeth, and we'll see you next time.